morning, you're watching Daybreak with me, Nadia Jani, live on A News. Here are your top stories for the day. Millions of Jeffrey Epstein files released by US Justice Department name some of Britain's elite. Gaza's Rafah crossing to reopen for Palestinians today, Israel says. And Iran's supreme leader warns any US attack would spark a regional war. First this morning, millions of new files relating to the late sex offender Jeffrey Epstein have been released by the US Department of Justice. Following the publication, several high-profile figures have come under renewed scrutiny, including former British Minister Peter Mandelson, who has now resigned from the Labour Party. Here's more on that story.
Former British Government Minister Peter Mandelson has resigned from Prime Minister Keir Starmer's Labour Party, following new reports about his links to disgraced financier Jeffrey Epstein. Mandelson was removed by Starmer as Britain's ambassador to the United States last year, after earlier revelations about his connection to Epstein.
And thank you very much.
After the latest disclosures, Mandelson said he did not want to cause further embarrassment to the Labour Party. His resignation follows reports by the Financial Times and the BBC, which cited documents appearing to show that Mandelson and his partner received payments totaling $75,000 from Epstein in 2003 and 2004. Mandelson said he believed these allegations were false and he would investigate them. On Friday, the US Justice Department released around 3 million pages, 180,000 images, and 2,000 videos linked to Jeffrey Epstein. This is the largest release so far, following a law passed last year requiring the documents to be made public. The files include emails between Epstein and a number of high-profile figures. Slovakia's Prime Minister, Robert Fico's National Security Advisor, Miroslav Lajčák, was also named. He resigned after new files showed that he and Epstein exchanged messages discussing women. He denies any wrongdoing. Some of the documents mention prominent figures, including President Donald Trump, former President Bill Clinton, and billionaire Elon Musk. The name of French President Emmanuel Macron has also drawn attention. His name appears in several documents from before and after his election in 2017. The records suggest Epstein claimed that Macron sought his help on various matters. The French presidency has not commented on the documents. The latest release comes 6 weeks after the Justice Department missed a deadline set by a law signed by President Trump, which required all Epstein-related documents to be made public.
Now let's take a look at the stories shaping the day across the globe. And with that first report, we know that we go to the A News website, an Epstein file site. Macron contacts with Trump, Musk and Prince Andrew also named. So this, as was mentioned in the report, was released on the Friday. Since then, a number of interesting facts and findings have come out. One of those being that this is the largest number of documents shared by the government since the law was mandated last year, and it includes details about Jeffrey Epstein's time in prison, including a psychological report and his death while incarcerated, along with investigative records on Ghislaine Maxwell, Epstein's associate, who was convicted of also helping to traffic underage girls. In the report, it's also, this headline is also on the New York Times, and it says they said they weren't close to Epstein. New documents show otherwise. So if we can go to the New York Times, who has a major report on this particular story as well, just basically stating that there are a number of people who have been identified and listed, and as mentioned, Macron is also one of those listed there as well. Many of the emails and documents go back more than a decade, showcasing Epstein's relationship amid his legal troubles. He was convicted in 2008 in Florida for soliciting sex from a 14-year-old girl after coming to controversial plea agreement with prosecutors, and then he later died in jail in 2019. So the documents shed light on the disgraced financer's close association as well with the British elite, and as mentioned in the report, British US Ambassador, well, the former British US Ambassador Lord Mandelson has resigned from the UK Labour Party, so not to cause any further embarrassment, he said. Also, Prince Andrew's wife, who's no longer the prince, so just Andrew, has his wife Sarah Ferguson and his daughters Princess Eugenie and Beatrice was also named in the Epstein files, detailing Ferguson's relationship with Epstein. And also the Crown Princess Meta Marit had extensive contacts with the late sex offender Jeffrey Epstein, as well as Elon Musk, who you can see there. I'm sure more details will come out, but it shows that there are a number of extra names that are associated with the late Epstein and exactly what happened there with the financer. Okay, we'll go to the next headline that is making its waves across the day, and that's The Guardian. And it states, Gaza's Rafah crossing to reopen for Palestinians on Monday, Israel says. So the border has been closed for almost 2 years now, and it was before the war began, and this is a direct exit point for most Palestinians in Gaza to reach the outside world, as well as a key entry point for aid. Now, the Kogat, which is the Israeli agency charged with the administration of Gaza, said the crossing would reopen in both directions for Gaza residents on foot only, and its operation would be coordinated with Egypt and the EU. There's a quote that states, "Today a pilot is underway to test and assess the operation of the crossing, the movement of residents in both directions, entry and exit to and from Gaza is expected to begin tomorrow," which is today. And if you just take a look at that map, if we just stop on the map, you can see here the Rafah crossing border between Egypt and Israel, and a number of people will be making that particular journey. It's actually an hour's journey by car, roughly a 4 to 5 hour journey by foot. Many of those expected to leave are sick and wounded people in need of medical care abroad, which they are not able to get in Gaza because of the war and the devastation there. An Israeli defense official also said the crossing could hold between 150 and 200 people in both directions. So we'll be giving you the latest as that comes through later on through the day. We now go to the next headline that is also making its waves across the morning, and that's on the Washington Post. It states, Iran's missiles pose deadly threat, Gulf allies warn as Trump weighs strikes. So it follows on from what Trump has been stating and the number of military forces he has actually sent over to the region. But on Sunday, its supreme leader warned that any attack by the United States would spark a regional war in the Middle East. Now, the comments came from the 86-year-old Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, are the most direct threats he's made so far in regards to Trump. And as I mentioned, Trump has sent a number of forces across to the Middle East from the US. We know that this was due to the first protest that was sparked in Iran at the end of December last year. Initially, those protests were over the collapse of Iran's real currency, but soon grew into a direct challenge to the Ayatollah's rule as demonstrators continued day after day. It remains unclear whether Trump will actually use force or whether or not he is just using that as a negotiation tactic. Trump has repeatedly said Iran needs to negotiate and has brought up Tehran's nuclear program as another issue he wants to resolve. Khamenei also addressed those who were referred in the nationwide protests as a coup, hardening the government's position as tens of thousands of people reportedly have been detained since the start of the demonstrations. And we know thousands have also been killed in those particular protests as well. Okay, now we move over to the third headline making waves today, and then we go to the BBC now, and in that it states there that 12 miners killed by Russian strike in Ukraine, officials say. So this was a Russian drone attack on a bus carrying mine workers in Ukraine's central eastern region in Dnipropetrovsk region, and at least it has killed roughly 12 people is the latest information that we find from that. Ukraine's largest private energy company said those killed were traveling from one of its mining facilities after they had finished their shift. The attacks came the same day as unilateral reduction on Russian strikes on Ukraine was announced by the US President Donald Trump was due to end. Trump said this on Thursday that Vladimir Putin had agreed to stop strikes on Kyiv and various towns during the Cold War. However, the Kremlin never agreed to that, never stated that that was something they were going to do, and said that they did not link the alleged truce to any form of weather conditions. We know that a second round of talks between Russia, Ukraine and US officials is due to happen and will begin on Wednesday. That's what Ukraine President Volodymyr Zelensky said on Sunday. So that's the latest on that. Now that's the press roundup. We're now going to take a short break, but when I return, I'll discuss the rest of the global stories. Make sure you stay with us.
Inside Politics delves deeply into the heart of global issues shaping our world today. Join me for your go-to source of political analysis from across the region and beyond.
Welcome back to Daybreak. Now let's have a look at the global stories. Turning to Gaza, and Gaza's main border crossing at Rafah is set to partially reopen today, offering limited movement in and out of the territory for the first time since May 2024. Here's more on that story.
Gaza's main border crossing at Rafah is set to resume limited travel from today, after months of near-total closure. Palestinian and Israeli officials say the reopening will begin with a trial phase, allowing a limited number of residents to cross as technical and security systems are tested. The crossing, which connects Gaza with Egypt, will open in both directions for residents on foot only. Before the war, Rafah was Gaza's primary exit point and a key entry route for humanitarian aid. It has been largely shut since May 2024. The move comes amid renewed violence across the Gaza Strip. Palestinian sources say at least 32 people were killed in Israeli airstrikes late Friday and Saturday, including in Khan Yunis, where displacement tents were hit.
Suddenly, the strike happened, and the entire area was engulfed in flames. Young men tried to rescue the children and women. It was an extremely difficult scene, impossible to describe or imagine.
I searched for my daughters and their brother, but no one responded. They were all burned. After that, I don't remember what happened.
Israel says the strikes targeted Hamas commanders and military infrastructure, describing them as a response to a ceasefire violation. Hamas has rejected that claim as false and misleading. Ambulances and aid trucks were seen waiting near the Rafah crossing on Sunday, though it remains unclear how many people will be allowed to pass during the initial phase.
A Russian drone attack has killed at least 12 people in southeastern Ukraine after a bus carrying mine workers was hit in the Dnipropetrovsk region on Sunday. Ukrainian officials say the strike comes as Russian attacks continue despite claims of a pause on energy infrastructure targets.
At least 12 people have been killed after a Russian drone struck a bus in Ukraine's southeastern Dnipropetrovsk region. Footage shows the burned-out vehicle with its windows shattered. 7 others were injured. In his nightly address, President Volodymyr Zelensky offered his condolences to the families.
There was a strike by Russian drones on a regular coach carrying miners. Unfortunately, there are many dead. My condolences to all relatives and friends.
Ukraine's energy minister described the strike as a cynical and targeted attack on energy sector workers. Energy company DTEK confirmed all the victims were its employees returning from underground operations. The attack comes as Ukraine's energy system remains under severe strain this winter, following months of Russian strikes on power and heating infrastructure. Kiev says Russian attacks have continued despite Moscow's claim that it agreed to pause strikes on Ukraine's energy infrastructure. Earlier the same day, Ukrainian officials also reported injuries after strikes hit a maternity hospital and residential buildings in the city of Zaporizhzhia. US brokered talks between Ukraine and Russia are scheduled to take place on the 4th and 5th of February in the United Arab Emirates.
On the latest update on protests in Minneapolis, President Trump has ordered federal authorities not to engage unless local officials request help or buildings are threatened. The move comes after weeks of unrest over federal immigration raids and the fatal shooting of 2 civilians, sparking widespread criticism and demonstrations across the city.
US President Donald Trump has ordered on Saturday that the Department of Homeland Security not to intervene in protests in Democratic-run cities unless local authorities request federal assistance or federal property is under threat. He made the remarks on his social media. The move follows weeks of unrest in Minnesota, triggered by a major deployment of immigration enforcement officers and the fatal shootings of 2 civilians, Renee Good and Alex Pretty, by federal agents. Despite his new order, Trump stressed that ICE and Border Patrol will firmly defend federal buildings, saying courthouses and government property would not be allowed to suffer any damage. Officials claim the officers acted in self-defense, but bystander video has cast doubt on their account. Minnesota officials had been calling for an end to the federal immigration crackdown through January, but on Saturday a federal judge rejected their bid to pause the operation. Protests have since spread, with activists closely monitoring immigration raids in Minneapolis and surrounding areas. In Washington, hundreds of residents braved bitter cold on Saturday to march against federal immigration enforcement and the recent fatal shootings by U.S. immigration agents in Minnesota. Protesters voiced their anger at ICE's actions, calling for agents to leave communities and chanting slogans against the agency.
US President Donald Trump said on Sunday that Washington is in talks with Cuba's leadership to reach a deal. His comments come just days after he threatened Cuba's struggling economy with what he described as a virtual oil blockade. Here's more.
Well, Cuba's a failing nation. It has been for a long time, but now it doesn't have Venezuela to prop it up. So we're talking to the people from Cuba, the highest people in Cuba, to see what happens. I want the people that came here that were horribly treated by Cuba to be taken care of, to be able to go back and do what they have to do. You know, they have their family there. They haven't been able to see them in years, many, many years. So I think we're going to make a deal with Cuba.
President Trump, back to Brexit.
It's in bad shape. Cuba's in bad shape. Cuba has a humanitarian problem.
Syria's authorities and the Kurdish-led Syrian Democratic Forces have reached a deal after weeks of armed confrontations, raising hopes of greater stability. Under the agreement, Interior Ministry security units are set to deploy to the northeastern cities of Hasaka and Qasmashili, returning SDF-held areas to government control. The deal has drawn international attention, with the US welcoming the move, while Turkey says it is closely reviewing the terms. Turning to the east, and Thailand's general election is just days away, with Thais began casting ballots on Sunday in early voting following months of political instability. Here's a look at that report.
Thailand is heading into a high-stakes general election on the 8th of February, with millions casting early ballots across the country. Residents are taking part in advance voting as the nation prepares for a poll that could reshape its political landscape. The election follows months of political turbulence. Prime Minister Anutin Chanvirakul called a snap poll in December after less than 100 days in office, amid parliamentary turmoil that raised the prospect of a no-confidence vote and the collapse of his minority government. The race has since narrowed into a three-way contest between Anutin's conservative Pumjaitai party, the former ruling Pheu Thai party and the reformist People's Party, as voters look for stability and political change.
I hope that we can get a leader that can develop communities that would then lead to a better society, not just the policies that will get them victory. I want their words and actions to align.
I came to vote today in hopes that we could have a better government. I don't hope for much. Each party also have different policies, but no matter who gets to become the government, I want them to lead the country to a better future.
Authorities set up more than 860 polling stations across Bangkok and other provinces. Bangkok recorded the highest number of advance voters with more than 840,000 registrants. Voters received 2 ballots, one to elect a constituency candidate and another to vote for a political party. All early ballots will be counted together with votes cast on election day. The 8th of February election will decide all 500 seats in the House of Representatives. A total of 57 political parties are contesting the vote, with more than 90 candidates nominated for the Prime Minister's post. Official results are expected by the 9th of April.
Staying in the east, there's large amounts of snow continues to batter parts of northern and western Japan, with some areas seeing the most in decades. Residents are struggling to cope as snow reaches historic levels. Here's more on that report.
Heavy snow continued to hit northern and western Japan on Saturday, causing disruption and testing the resilience of local communities. Niigata Prefecture's Uwanuma City saw snow depths past 273 centimeters, blanketing streets and homes.
I clear the snow, I sleep, I get up, I clear the snow. Sometimes I eat.
Meanwhile, the city of Aomori in northern Japan recorded a total of 167 centimeters on Friday, the highest level since 1945. Authorities say snow clearing teams are struggling to keep up, with some areas only serviced every few weeks.
They came to clear the snow recently, but it's already like this again.
Even though they come weekly?
No. They only come once every 3 to 4 weeks.
The extreme snowfall continues to affect transport, daily routines, and puts pressure on emergency services as communities brace for more wintry conditions.
We're going to take a break now. When I return, I'll discuss the key regional headlines with a studio guest to help us unpack more. Stay with us.
Hello and welcome to Primetime. What a show we've got lined up for you. In a complex world, clarity is power. 2 hours live, diplomacy dissected in a spin-free environment. That's Prime Time with me, Guy Schoen, weekdays on A News.
Welcome back and thank you for joining me this morning. Now let's go through the top news stories of what's happening across the region. Iran's Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei has warned that any attack on the country could spark a regional conflict. It comes after President Donald Trump sent military forces to the Middle East. Meanwhile, the European Union has designated Iran's IRGC as a terrorist organization, prompting Tehran to respond with threats against the armed forces of all EU member states.
Iran's Supreme Leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, says that any attack on the country could trigger a regional conflict. Iran also announced it is in a state of full military readiness. Deputy Commander of the IRGC, Ahmad Vahidi, says the armed forces are better prepared than during the 12-day conflict in June, and that all potential enemy movements are being closely monitored. The comments made on Sunday comes after the US announced it had deployed aircraft carrier USS Abraham Lincoln to the region, with Central Command confirming its operations in the Arabian Sea. However, Iran's Supreme Leader says Tehran won't be intimidated.
The Americans have threatened us repeatedly in the past, saying all options are on the table, which includes the option of war. They've always said these things. Similarly, this person, Donald Trump, constantly claims they've brought warships, but the Iranian nation shall not be intimidated by these things. The Iranian people will not be stirred by these threats.
US President Donald Trump dismissed warnings of a potential regional conflict.
Why wouldn't he say that? Of course you're going to say that, but we have the biggest, most powerful ships in the world over there, very close, a couple of days, and hopefully we'll make a deal. If we don't make a deal, then we'll find out whether or not he was right.
On Friday, senior US and Israeli military officials held a closed-door meeting at the Pentagon, while Israeli Defense Minister Israel Katz met Zamir to review operational readiness. Last week, the EU designated Iran's IRGC as a terrorist organization and imposed sanctions on 15 officials and 6 entities covering 247 individuals and 50 organizations. In response, Iranian Parliament Speaker Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf said Tehran would treat the armed forces of all EU member states as terrorist groups, with the consequences shared collectively.
Staying on Iran, its residents have criticized the American military buildup in the Middle East, saying Washington is doing it all for its own benefit and warns it only increases regional instability.
Iranians have voiced concerns about Washington's actions abroad, claiming the United States consistently puts its own interests above the needs of local populations. These concerns come as President Donald Trump has increased the US military presence near Iran, sending what he called a massive armada aimed to urge Tehran to return to negotiations on a fair and equitable nuclear deal. Many argue that the US military presence in the Middle East fuels instability rather than peace.
Has the US ever truly helped people in any places like Iraq, Syria, Venezuela, or Lebanon? Has it ever considered the needs of local people? The only thing that matters to the US is its own national interests and wealth.
They, the US military, have never brought security, only anxiety. It's not just us. Other countries in the region share the same worries about the future. Can the presence of the US military truly bring security? On the contrary, if they withdraw, peace will follow, and our security will significantly improve.
Analysts caution that with diplomacy looking unlikely, any escalation could have serious consequences, urging restraint to avoid a wider regional crisis.
Rail cargo movement across the South Caucasus is helping regional connectivity, with a fresh consignment of Russian grain reaching Armenia via Azerbaijan territory on Sunday. Our reporter sent us this.
Marking a further sign of growing regional connectivity, 25 rail wagons carrying grain, weighing around 1,750 tons in total, was sent to Armenia on Sunday via transit through Azerbaijan. The latest shipment brings the overall volume of grain transported from Russia to Armenia through Azerbaijani territory to 285 wagons, amounting to nearly 20,000 tons. The development follows President Ilham Aliyev's October 2025 decision to lift transit restrictions on goods bound for Armenia, restrictions that had been in place during the period of Armenian occupation of Azerbaijani territories, after which both direct and the transit rail deliveries along the road have been carried out without disruption. Alongside the grain shipments, Azerbaijan's state oil company SOKAR has also delivered several rail shipments of fuel to Armenia in recent weeks, including petrol and diesel. As Armenia's Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan says, diesel prices in the country have fallen following the establishment of peace with Azerbaijan.
Ambassadors from European Union member states have approved a new military assistance package for Armenia worth 20 million euros. The decision has sparked concern among regional experts who warn it could undermine fragile peace efforts in the South Caucasus. Here's more on that story.
The European Union has agreed to provide Armenia with 20 million euros in military assistance under the European Peace Facility. EU officials say the support will be limited to non-lethal military equipment. This follows an earlier allocation of 10 million euros in 2024, the first time in history that the EU provided military-related support to Armenia under the facility. However, the move has triggered criticism from analysts and regional observers, particularly in Azerbaijan, where experts argue the decision risks destabilizing the region.
Let's go back to the agreement, the cooperation agreement between EU and Armenia. And it was actually a very paradoxical document, which already included some statements that broke the peace agenda and the peace process regarding to the criteria and to the outcomes of the Washington summit. So it's really unclear who pushed for this agreement in the European Union, which parliamentarians are voting for this, what was the background of this agreement, and why it is military assistance the main priority of these major budget allocations and money allocations to Armenia.
The expert says the EU's decision could become a serious obstacle to the peace-building process between Azerbaijan and Armenia, warning that instead of supporting reconciliation, it may fuel renewed tensions.
If the conflict is over, it's not logical that EU giving so much budget, so much and many euros to Armenia, because we are now on the peace process and there's no, let's say, military factor in the peace agenda. So it's very controversial, and I will see it's even double standards. From one side, EU supporting the peace agenda and the outcomes of the Washington summit, and we can understand this perspective from the statements of Ursula von der Leyen, from the Costa and other officials. From the other side, this really controversial.
According to the expert, Baku has also expressed concern that previous EU policy documents outlining strategic cooperation with Armenia included issues that, in Azerbaijan's view, revive past disputes instead of focusing on future-oriented peace. Azerbaijan has been working to place its relations with the European Union on a positive footing, while viewing the bloc's current stance as increasingly unbalanced. As diplomatic efforts continue, the experts stressed that maintaining neutrality and balance will be crucial if the European Union hopes to contribute meaningfully to lasting peace between Azerbaijan and Armenia.
Now we're going to stay on that particular subject, and joining me now to discuss those concerns is Shiraz Mahmoud Khan, a research scholar at the Western Caspian University. Welcome today.
My pleasure.
My first question, really, against the backdrop of what we just heard in that particular report, the EU's decision to expand military-related assistance to Armenia seems to be poorly timed. But what message does this send about Europe's understanding of the current phase of the peace process?
Well, the peace process, as we know, that it took place last year in Washington in the presence of President Trump and both of the presidents of Armenia and Azerbaijan, both of the leaders. The region was happy because the region came out of the conflict of decades. And it was a territorial problems. The whole world knows it, that, as it was Azerbaijan's territories, fought for decades for its territorial integrity. And at last, the region was at peace. So things were progressing, things were good, and things were okay. And this EU funding Armenia suddenly does not balance the region in that way, because it's 20 million in terms of it's just not for any other projects and all that. It's basically to strengthen the military, and why strengthening the military now is a big question. And does it affect the stability? Of course. Does it affect the peace talk? Of course. Does it bring in the insecurity for Azerbaijan? Yes. And obviously Azerbaijan would not be really comfortable in going through the peace process or negotiations in that kind of circumstances.
Yes, and you mentioned a couple of points. So do you think that it reflects an imbalance between the EU's declared peace objectives and its practical policy instruments then?
Yeah, of course, because at EU, this is not the first time that EU is doing that. In the past, it's just not the first mistake or first error, or it's not a human error or something. EU has done that before as well, and so it is a second time or third time. It's kind of a pattern which we are seeing right now. Favoring Armenia a lot. Funding Armenia would be all right, but the same kind of a fund should be allocated to Azerbaijan if you will need to fund. But why are you funding? What are you, against? What are you scared of? Because Azerbaijan is done. Azerbaijan is done with the war of decades. It needs its peace because Azerbaijan needs to do multilateral and multi-vector now. They want to do, every country right now should be more focused on the trade and relations and bilateral relations and people-to-people connection and all that. That's what Azerbaijan needs to do, and other parts of the region. But why Armenia is being funded is a big question.
It is that big question, and I don't even know whether or not you can answer the reasons why that 20 million is for their army assistance. But because of that assistance, do you think it's inadvertently undermining the trust at the moment when things are still quite fragile in regards to the peace process here?
It is fragile. It is fragile. If you're funding one of the parties and not funding the other, it becomes fragile automatically. And Azerbaijan, wants to towards EU. Azerbaijan always wanted to integrate into EU, or wanted to have not integrate, but wanted to have good relations with EU. In the past, be it the trade, be it the communication, could be anything. Azerbaijan has always extended a hand of friendship towards EU, and is ready to extend its friendship towards Armenia. But in this case, it's quite we cannot really figure it out. Even now, European Union should reconsider their decisions and all that, and they can always refrain of doing that, because it would not escalate just the tensions and all that. It can escalate all kind of tensions, and not really good for the region.
Exactly, and I think it creates more questions as to why, instead of putting more focus on the peace process. So in that sense, Azerbaijan has repeatedly emphasised, as you mentioned, the EU's role in the South Caucasus should be evenly handed and supportive of regional stability. But can the EU then credibly act as a stabilising partner while pursuing policies that seem quite asymmetric by one of the key regional actors then?
Well, EU is supposed to be a stabilizing partner, and this is it is supposed to balance between the two countries, or even the region, right? All the actors in the region, but that is not being witnessed, and that's a concern. And what EU can do right now, they can always revisit their decisions and put all the political actors, in that context, and take them into confidence, because the lack of confidence in the EU can destabilize everything, right? Can bring in the perception that if they want peace in the region, they should be non-biased kind of a approach. You know what I'm saying? So, but in this region, every country is trying to have focus on the trades and communication and all that. And even for the bigger powers in the region, instability in the region is not good. At this point in time, where you have unstable Iran, you have unstable Afghanistan, even unstable Pakistan. So, I mean, unstable Azerbaijan does not go in favor of any of the powers at the moment.
So in that sense, what do you think are the long-term costs of such an imbalance between the EU and Azerbaijan relations, seeing as they are committing to this particular 20 million euro donation to Armenia?
Well, EU is supposed to provide a security, okay? So is US is trying to provide a security in the region as well. What does it mean? The peace shake hands between the Armenian leader and Azerbaijan leader, they just went in vain? That does not make sense. Or was it just for people to know that, all right, okay, we are trying to have peace, but actually they're not trying to have peace, tilting on one side of Armenia and ignoring Azerbaijan at the same time. So, the US as a bigger power should make sure that whatever deal they are going through is substantial in the long term, and for that they need to act as a deal maker, not something to be biased on one side and not to be biased on the other side. So the US should intervene and make sure that there's a stability in the country, both of the countries. Not only Azerbaijan, but both of the countries cannot really afford any kind of a more war, because they have been in decades and all that. So it's time to go multi-vector. It's time to go another higher step. So, I mean, and that goes in the favor of US as well. So US right now should intervene, and obviously there is a lot of conflict between EU and European countries and US at this point in time, because every morning you get up, things are different. I mean, you talk about geopolitics, you talk about changes in geopolitics, the changes are coming, hour and hour after. I mean, it's like everything is like really, you cannot really figure it out what's going on. But in this kind of a scenario where people are going multi-vector and the middle powers are trying to secure for each other, getting the securities and all that, the bigger powers have their own role. And it should make sure that whatever they're trying to say to both of the countries, like peace and all that, goes in their favor as well. And they should mediate as soon as possible.
So the European Peace Facility is explicitly, as you mentioned, designed to prevent conflicts, but they are doing what they are doing might actually be interpreted to be the opposite. Is Europe underestimating how sensitive the military assistance is in a region emerging from war?
It is. It is. I mean, they should. Well, if European Union thinks that a war breaks in with this kind of a thing, does that go in European Union's favor too? No, it does not. Does that go in Armenia's favor? No, it does not. Does that go in Azerbaijan's favor? No, it does not. Does that go in anyone's favor? No, it does not. So it does not make any sense. I cannot figure it out. Why did they do it in the first place? I mean, I get up in the morning, I say, switch on the TV, like, what's going on? Okay, so that kind of, I mean, people are really, all these scholars and political analysts, they're really confused. Well, the world is already very confused, but then we are totally confused. You know what I'm saying? So, yeah, I mean, in the longer run, it should just go on. It should not really go on like that. It should be conflict for 30 years, territorial problems. It was Azerbaijan's continuous effort to get its territories back for all these years. You cannot push the countries again back to the war.
No, and I think my final question right now on that is, do you think Europe can move forward in a truly balanced regional policy, one that supports stability for all parties and consolidates rather than endangers, as we mentioned, the emerging peace of the South Caucasus because it's such a fragile state?
It should, if they are interested in doing that. I mean, EU is a peace tool. And peace means to talk about peace, not to talk about war, not to equip one country and not to equip another country, and to keep a balance between the countries, to tell them to come to negotiation tables and then mean it as well. Not just for the photography and all that, okay, fine, we're doing this peace deal and all that. It should materialize its agreements and all that, and a longer peace is required in not only in this part of the region but every part of the region in the world. We can no one can afford economically. No one can afford. No big powers can afford to go in any kind of a war or conflict, because if we see this part of the region, U.S. coming out of Afghanistan after 20 years, spending billions of dollars. Replace Talibans by Talibans did not really make sense. This conflict in Iran would have its own implications. If this is not settled, things would go bad. It would affect Azerbaijan, if we're Central Asian countries, and the whole region probably, and Middle East as well. So, and then Iran, Israel conflicts and all that. So you cannot afford right now. I mean, I don't think so that any sane policymaker would be in favor of any kind of disturbance in the region, because the world has seen that. 20 years in Afghanistan was the biggest NATO, everything was done, nothing much was achieved. Instead, leaving 7 billion of equipment back in Afghanistan. So the world should realize that things would not be achieved unless until you just go economically. Yeah. Because in economics, U.S. is not really doing good at the moment. Yesterday, I was just seeing one of the statements of about the U.S. economies and all that. Why? Because people, the countries in a war for a longer period of time, they ruin their economics. So it's time to build the economics, to go multi-vector, to be happy, and to work trade and all that, and this for everyone.
Indeed. Well, thank you so much.
The middle powers, the bigger powers, and the lower powers.
Yes, exactly that. Well, thank you so much for joining me on the program today, Mr. Shiraz Mahmood Khan there. Right. Now, at least 10 people have died and 26 others injured after a passenger bus overturned in Antalya, Turkey, while traveling from Tekirdağ in rainy and foggy conditions. Authorities say a technical investigation will determine the exact cause, while recovery operations continue at the scene. Here's more.
A passenger bus crash in Antalya in Turkey has killed at least 10 people and injured 26, according to Turkish news agency IHA on Sunday. The accident occurred as the vehicle was carrying 34 passengers from Tekirdağ to Antalya in rainy and foggy conditions.
We were coming to Antalya from Isparta. There was fog on the road. The driver was very fast. When we got to the curve, he couldn't turn. First, we toppled on our side and slid. Then the barrier stuck into it, the bus. We flew down there with the passengers.
Emergency services provided medical aid to the injured and transported the victims to hospital.
The details of the accident will be determined later through a technical investigation. But as you can see, it's raining. The ground is wet. There was also some fog at that time. However, this is not a place to speed. It's an intersection. It appears that the bus entered the intersection very fast. These things will become clear in the later stages. I can say it again. It was a passenger bus that left Tekirdağ last night.
The exact cause of the accident will be determined through a technical investigation. Drone footage shows the bus lying on its side in a roadside ditch, with recovery operations ongoing.
Turning to South Asia, and at least 145 militants were killed in the Pakistan province of Balochistan on Sunday after coordinated gun and bomb attacks. The banned Baloch Liberation Army claimed responsibility for the assaults. Here's more on the report.
Pakistani security forces say they killed at least 145 militants during a 40-hour counter-operation, according to provincial officials on Sunday. The action followed a wave of coordinated gun and bomb attacks across the southwestern province of Balochistan. Security forces say they launched sweeping clearance operations across the province, sealing off multiple sites and increasing patrols. The attacks, among the deadliest in years, targeted civilians and infrastructure in several districts. Authorities say 17 security personnel and at least 31 civilians were killed.
Yesterday, BLA people came and broke the windows and doors and entered inside. Then they hit me on the eye and head. Then they told us to take off our uniforms and leave. So we took off our uniforms and were thrown out of the bank.
The banned separatist group Baloch Liberation Army claimed responsibility, saying it carried out a coordinated operation dubbed Black Storm. Pakistan's government accused India of backing the rebels, a claim Delhi denies. Balochistan, Pakistan's largest and poorest province, has faced a decades-long insurgency led by ethnic Baloch separatists demanding greater autonomy and a larger share of the region's natural resources.
The climate across Central Asia is worsening, according to the United Nations. Rising drought and environmental pressures are increasingly affecting daily life. New data from the Tajikistan highlights a sharp increase in dust storms across the region. Our correspondent has more from Tashkent.
Climate change is accelerating environmental pressure across Central Asia, with shrinking water resources, land degradation and desertification reshaping the region's climate patterns. According to the United Nations, more than 38% of the region's land is now affected by drought, reducing vegetation and allowing dust and sand to spread more easily. Experts also point to poor land and water management, as well as the drying of the Aral Sea, which continues to release salt and dust into the atmosphere. The trend is clearly visible in Tajikistan, where officials recorded 63 dust storms last year, lasting a combined 216 days. Most storms originate from deserts in North Africa and the Middle East and are carried into Central Asia by cyclones. Storm frequency has increased more than tenfold over the past 3 decades. Environmental organizations warn the situation could worsen without stronger regional coordination. The United Nations Convention to Combat Desertification says land degradation, unsustainable irrigation, and rapid construction without green infrastructure are accelerating dust formation. Experts stress that expanding forest belts, restoring degraded land, and improving early warning systems are critical to protecting agriculture, transport networks, and public health, as dust storms increasingly disrupt daily life and raise respiratory disease risks across the region. It is Sivil Rajab reporting from Tashkent, Uzbekistan A News.
It's time for a quick break, but when I come back, I'll have a full update of the latest headlines, plus a look at what's making the front pages this morning. Stay with us.
Inside Politics delves deeply into the heart of global issues shaping our world today. Join me for your go-to source of political analysis from across the region and beyond.
Welcome back to Daybreak, and for those joining me, I'm Nadia Jani, live on A News. Here are your top stories. Millions of Jeffrey Epstein files released by US Justice Department name some of Britain's elite. Gaza's Rafah crossing to reopen for Palestinians today, Israel says. And Iran's supreme leader warns any US attack would spark a regional war. Let's first head to over the main headlines making its way across the morning, and we go first to a news website, and that states Epstein files cite Macron, contacts with Trump, Musk and Prince Andrew also named. So just to bring you up to speed for those just joining us this morning, millions of newly released Epstein files were released over the weekend, and it's the largest number of documents shared by the US government since a law was mandated for their release last year. There are roughly 3 million pages and 180,000 images and 2,000 videos were posted publicly. The release came 6 weeks after the department missed a deadline signed into law by the US President Donald Trump. The files include details about Jeffrey Epstein's time in prison, including a psychological report, his death while incarcerated, along with a number of associates who was convicted of, along a number of people who were in association with him. President Trump is named a number of times inside those documents, and emails that go back at least a decade showcase Epstein's relationships and his legal troubles. We will have some more information in regards to that story. Also, I know that the New York Times is also leading with that as well, and it sheds light on a number of information there. And as you can see, so it's on BBC's right now, and BBC says takeaways from the millions of newly released Epstein files. To my right, your left, it's Lord Mandelson. We've got Ghislaine Maxwell, and then we have former Prince Andrew here, who have all been named in these files. And due to that, the former British US ambassador, Lord Mandelson, right here, has resigned from the UK Labour Party, saying that he does not want to cause any further embarrassment as this information has leaked some more telling revelations that he says is not true. Prince Andrew's wife right here, Prince Andrew, whose title has been stripped, his wife was also mentioned, along with his 2 daughters, Princesses Beatrice and Eugenie. In those documents, Sarah Ferguson had a close friendship with Epstein and also detailed a number of emails exchanged that they had. And also the Crown Princess, Meta Marit, had extensive contacts with the late sex offender Jeffrey Epstein. So all this information is currently coming out, as I mentioned, with a number of names being identified, and due to that, the previous UK-US ambassador has resigned from the Labour Party as well. Now we go over to our next story, which I believe is the New York Times, and that's in reference to what is going on with the border crossing. So what to know about the Rafah border crossing in Gaza. So as I mentioned in one of the top headlines today, it's stating that the border crossing will be open, is what Israel has said, and it has been closed for almost 2 years before the war began and is a direct and exit point for most Palestinians in Gaza to reach the outside world as well as a key entry point for aid. Kogat, who is the Israeli agency charged with the administration of Gaza, said the crossing would reopen in both directions for Gaza residents on foot only, and its operation would be in coordination with Egypt and the EU. It's a pilot today, so they're testing it out to see exactly how many people come across that particular border. Many of those who are expected to cross are actually seeking medical aid. There are many people who are sick and wounded who need medical aid from abroad. And an Israeli defense official said the crossing could hold between 150 and 200 people altogether in both directions. Recent information shows that that Israeli attacks in Gaza have killed more than 500 Palestinians since the ceasefire began. That's what local health officials have said. Okay, and then we move to the final story making headlines this morning, and that's France 24. It states a massive landslide in Eastern Democratic Congo coltan mine kills at least 200 people. Now, the mine is in the town called Rabeya, gave way on Wednesday due to heavy rains, which is the picture that you can see coming up right now. At the time, the death toll remained very unclear, but with more information now circulating, we know that it's almost 200 people have actually been killed due to that. It stated that women and children were amongst those mining in coltan, which is a mineral used to manufacture electronics such as smartphones and computers at the time. A former supervisor for the mine told the BBC actually that the site was not properly maintained, making accidents more likely and hampering rescue efforts when they occur. They added that the fragile nature of the soil made the situation worse. On top of that, Congolese authorities have blamed the deaths on rebels, saying they were putting lives of civilians at risk, though allowing illegal mining without enforcing safety standards. And they stated that they had banned mining in the area last year, even though rebels had already seized control of the mines by then. Apparently, there are now roughly around 20 survivors are said to be receiving medical treatment in a nearby hospital. Great, we now turn to our first story this morning, and it states with millions of new files relating to the late sex offender Jeffrey Epstein has been released by the Department of Justice by the US. Following the publication, several high-profile figures have come under renewed scrutiny, including former British Minister Peter Mandelson, who has now resigned from the Labour Party. Here's more on that particular story.
Former British Government Minister Peter Mandelson has resigned from Prime Minister Keir Starmer's Labour Party following new reports about his links to disgraced financier Jeffrey Epstein. Mandelson was removed by Starmer as Britain's ambassador to the United States last year, after earlier revelations about his connection to Epstein.
And thank you very much.
After the latest disclosures, Mandelson said he did not want to cause further embarrassment to the Labour Party. His resignation follows reports by the Financial Times and the BBC, which cited documents appearing to show that Mandelson and his partner received payments totalling $75,000 from Epstein in 2003 and 2004. Mandelson said he believed these allegations were false and he would investigate them. On Friday, the US Justice Department released around 3 million pages, 180,000 images, and 2,000 videos linked to Jeffrey Epstein. This is the largest release so far, following a law passed last year requiring the documents to be made public. The files include emails between Epstein and a number of high-profile figures. Slovakia's Prime Minister, Robert Fico's National Security Advisor, Miroslav Lajčák, was also named. He resigned after new files showed that he and Epstein exchanged messages discussing women. He denies any wrongdoing. Some of the documents mention prominent figures, including President Donald Trump, former President Bill Clinton, and billionaire Elon Musk. The name of French President Emmanuel Macron has also drawn attention. His name appears in several documents from before and after his election in 2017. The records suggest Epstein claimed that Macron sought his help on various matters. The French presidency has not commented on the documents. The latest release comes 6 weeks after the Justice Department missed a deadline set by a law signed by President Trump, which required all Epstein-related documents to be made public.
Gaza's main border crossing at Rafah is set to partially reopen today, offering limited movement in and out of the territory for the first time since May 2024. Here's more.
Gaza's main border crossing at Rafah is set to resume limited travel from today, after months of near-total closure. Palestinian and Israeli officials say the reopening will begin with a trial phase, allowing a limited number of residents to cross as technical and security systems are tested. The crossing, which connects Gaza with Egypt, will open in both directions for residents on foot only. Before the war, Rafah was Gaza's primary exit point and a key entry route for humanitarian aid. It has been largely shut since May 2024. The move comes amid renewed violence across the Gaza Strip. Palestinian sources say at least 32 people were killed in Israeli airstrikes late Friday and Saturday, including in Khan Yunis, where displacement tents were hit.
Suddenly, the strike happened, and the entire area was engulfed in flames. Young men tried to rescue the children and women. It was an extremely difficult scene, impossible to describe or imagine.
I searched for my daughters and their brother, but no one responded. They were all burned. After that, I don't remember what happened.
Israel says the strikes targeted Hamas commanders and military infrastructure, describing them as a response to a ceasefire violation. Hamas has rejected that claim as false and misleading. Ambulances and aid trucks were seen waiting near the Rafah crossing on Sunday, though it remains unclear how many people will be allowed to pass during the initial phase.
Joining me now to discuss this reopening of the border in further detail is Osama Rizvi, founder of Rizvi Insights in Lahore, Pakistan. Thank you for joining me this morning.
Thank you so much for having me today.
My first question really is, the opening of the Rafah crossing was part of the first phase of what the US brokered ceasefire agreement was about, which came into effect mid-October. Israel refused to open the crossing until the last of the hostages was returned. And now that that's happened, is this now good news for Palestinians who can now cross and go over to seek medical assistance or reconnect with families as well?
Well, from a certain perspective, it is definitely a good news, because what was happening before was a total closure of this very important passageway between Egypt and Palestine. So I think in that regard, this is a welcoming news. However, on the other hand, the number of people leaving, only people on foot have been are allowed to cross this border crossing, and so many other factors. There have been recent bouts of violence as well. So I think from a bigger picture perspective, this would not be enough, and we would like to see more positive news on this end, because if it remains only at this point, like one border crossing is opened and maybe 150, 200 people are allowed to pass, that's just nothing, in terms of what has ensued overall.
And in that sense, why do you think Israel has reopened the crossing for Gaza residents, as you mentioned, by foot only, considering there's a majority of people who need medical assistance? So that might be quite difficult for those who are already injured or ill, having to do this particular crossing by foot.
Well, there is a history of various tactics being used when countries are in situation of war, as they would claim, but from a humanitarian point of view, this is of course not endorsable, nor I cannot support such a tactic or such a move. But maybe there are security concerns of cars, etc., or anything vehicular. That is why they have not allowed it. But in terms of, if you look at the number of people suffering from the food crisis, famine, otherwise health issues, there have been stories of people waiting for kidney dialysis, etc., receiving treatment abroad, and they've been just waiting. And for them, every passing second seems like a day. So I think allowing people only on foot is, again, not a very encouraging step. And I hope that the UN and other peace-building countries in the world looks into this in further detail.
And as you mentioned, there was a number of restrictions that Israel has provided for those crossing the borders, a maximum of 150 to 200 Palestinians coming to and fro, as well as very rigorous checks as they come in and out. Why do you think Israel is putting all those things in place alongside, I believe at least 20,000 Palestinians want to make the journey, but only 150 to 200 are able to do that on a daily basis?
I think it's basically this is basically to have some of a bargaining power for the future as well, because we both know that the conflict in Middle East is not resolved by any means, by any extent. So I think they are seeing some prolonged, confrontation, and that is why they want, unfortunately, they want some of the bargaining power, hence not allowing everyone to leave.
As you mentioned, that the conflict has been quite brutal there. Not only that, Israeli attacks in Gaza have killed more than 500 Palestinians since the ceasefire began in October. That's according to local officials. Now, Palestinian militants have also killed 4 Israeli troops as well. Do you think the first phase of the agreement has been a success in Washington's believes it has? But against this particular backdrop, what do you make of that?
Well, let's look at the facts, or maybe, stripped of any opinion. We know that what is happening there, there has been lots of violations and transgressions of international law and order and international order, rules-based order. There is a lot of debate going on. Has become a sham. So I think that speaks a lot about the success, so-called success of the first phase. I think in Washington, the idea or the sentiment is that at least something is better than nothing. I agree, but I believe that much more needs to be done, and it is always a very tenuous situation, and we have a history of ceasefire violations on both ends. So I think it's a very tricky situation, and we need something more palpable. We need something more, that would be legally binding on all the parties.
Well, then this moves over to the next phases that Trump's plan for Gaza requires. Governance to be handed over to Palestinian technocrats, Hamas to lay down its weapons, and Israeli troops to withdraw from the territory. How likely or smoothly is this next phase due to be implemented, or do you think there'll be obstacles to that particular second phase?
Well, if history serves a precedent, I think it would be a very difficult and rough transition if it happens at all. We also have to look at what's going on currently, and unfortunately, there is a potential that we may see renewed aggression from both sides, which will further delay the implementation of these 3 or 4 reforms that you've just mentioned.
And Hamas has so far rejected disarmament, which is what Israel has been calling for in relation to that. If, for whatever reason, will it make it hard for things to progress? Could things return to how it was prior to the October ceasefire if Hamas decides, no, we want to stay armed, or Israel is no longer budging on certain forms of change?
Yes, I think the whole idea of the blame game is very unfortunate, but also very tricky, because no one can decide what is actually happening, right? But what is happening, what we know is happening, is that we continue to see strikes by Israeli forces as well, on hospitals, on camps, on relief sites. So I think it is about time that the world, like the Middle Eastern players like Saudi Arabia, Qatar, UAE, and also the Western players, they give serious attention to this matter, because we are operating in a world of poly crisis, where multiple crises are existing at the same time. And I think it is for the benefit of everyone that out of these multiple crises, as many crises, geopolitical ones especially, if they can be resolved, they should be resolved with priority, because this will also spill over, and it is also already spilling over into the economic domain as well. We saw stocks declining right now. Asian markets are bleeding. Metals are also down. So this is telling us something like this. These are signs of something big that is about to come.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Rizvi, for joining us and for your insights. They've been exceptional for our programme. Thank you again.
Thank you. Thank you.
Now, a Russian drone attack has killed at least 12 people in southeastern Ukraine after a bus carrying mine workers was hit in the Dnipropetrovsk region on Sunday. Ukrainian officials say the strike comes as Russian attacks continue despite claims of a pause on energy infrastructure targets. Here's more on that report.
At least 12 people have been killed after a Russian drone struck a bus in Ukraine's southeastern Dnipropetrovsk region. Footage shows the burned-out vehicle with its windows shattered. 7 others were injured. In his nightly address, President Volodymyr Zelensky offered his condolences to the families.
There was a strike by Russian drones on a regular coach carrying miners. Unfortunately, there are many dead. My condolences to all relatives and friends.
Ukraine's energy minister described the strike as a cynical and targeted attack on energy sector workers. Energy company DTEK confirmed all the victims were its employees returning from underground operations. The attack comes as Ukraine's energy system remains under severe strain this winter, following months of Russian strikes on power and heating infrastructure. Kiev says Russian attacks have continued despite Moscow's claim that it agreed to pause strikes on Ukraine's energy infrastructure. Earlier the same day, Ukrainian officials also reported injuries after strikes hit a maternity hospital and residential buildings in the city of Zaporizhzhia. US brokered talks between Ukraine and Russia are scheduled to take place on the 4th and 5th of February in the United Arab Emirates.
We are actually turning to the South Asia, and at least 145 militants were killed in the Pakistan province of Balochistan on Sunday after a coordinated gun and bomb attack. The banned Baloch Liberation Army claimed responsibility for the assaults. Here's more on that report.
Pakistani security forces say they killed at least 145 militants during a 40-hour counter-operation, according to provincial officials on Sunday. The action followed a wave of coordinated gun and bomb attacks across the southwestern province of Balochistan. Security forces say they launched sweeping clearance operations across the province, sealing off multiple sites and increasing patrols. The attacks, among the deadliest in years, targeted civilians and infrastructure in several districts. Authorities say 17 security personnel and at least 31 civilians were killed.
Yesterday, BLA people came and broke the windows and doors and entered inside. Then they hit me on the eye and head. Then they told us to take off our uniforms and leave. So we took off our uniforms and were thrown out of the bank.
The banned separatist group Baloch Liberation Army claimed responsibility, saying it carried out a coordinated operation dubbed Black Storm. Pakistan's government accused India of backing the rebels, a claim Delhi denies. Balochistan, Pakistan's largest and poorest province, has faced a decades-long insurgency led by ethnic Baloch separatists demanding greater autonomy and a larger share of the region's natural resources.
Let's take a short break. When I return, I'll bring you what's making the headlines in the tech world. Stay with us.
Unfiltered news and analysis from the region and beyond. From Washington to Beijing, Tehran to Kabul, to Tbilisi to Tashkent. Challenges.
Today is the third.
We're with you 24/7, taking you live to the front lines of the day's biggest stories. Welcome to Gabala. One important note to fears. I'm here.
Azerbaijan and Armenia.
Hello, we are reporting on the 8th of November.
Reporting from Paris,
Dar es Salaam, Tel Aviv,
Washington,
London,
Moscow,
Kyiv, Berlin,
Rio de Janeiro, Beijing, Bangkok, Tbilisi, Tashkent, Almaty, Kazakhstan, Port Sudan, Tehran, Islamabad, Istanbul,
Kabul, Port Emu.
Welcome back. You're watching Daybreak with me, Nadia Jani. Now to tech news, and the world's biggest online shopping retailer, Amazon, has cut 16,000 jobs in a push towards artificial intelligence. Alongside that, Samsung's chip business is proving to be very profitable, with a record high of almost $40 billion in the fourth quarter last year. Here's a look at Switch, our new tech show, by journalist Nathan Kamanga with more news.
Amazon is making headlines for a massive corporate call, but it's the way the news broke that has the tech world buzzing. What started as an accidental calendar invite for something called Project Dawn ended with 16,000 employees officially being shown the door. A senior vice president of people experience and technology at the firm clarified the move in a statement, saying despite the current layoffs, the company is expected to continue hiring. Specific areas affected in the cuts have not been made public. However, some employees working in Alexa Voice Assistant, Kindle, Prime Video, advertising, last mile delivery, and others indicated they had been impacted. The tech giant also said they were investing billions in infrastructure and education as it makes a, quote, technological transformation. Amazon employs around 1.5 million people globally, with around 350,000 in corporate roles. This is the second major round of cuts in just 4 months, bringing the total headcount to around 30,000 roles. In other news, Samsung is riding the artificial intelligence wave all the way to the bank. The South Korean tech giant just reported a record-breaking fourth quarter, with operating costs reaching a staggering 20 million won, or around $14 billion. Driven by an unprecedented demand for AI chips, according to co-CEO T.M. Rowe, Samsung's profit in the chip division skyrocketed by 470%. In a statement released by the company, it said the ongoing AI boom is expected to continue driving favorable market conditions across the industry. Kim Jae-joon, who's a memory chip business executive at Samsung, added that a significant shortage of memory products across the board is expected to continue for the time being. Meanwhile, high chip prices and global tariff risks are squeezing Samsung's mobile and display businesses. Mobile profits dipped to 1.9 trillion won as manufacturing costs climbed. The company warned that global risks, like new tariffs, could keep prices high. This means that your next Galaxy phone might just come with a higher price tag. All in all, Samsung is the one to keep an eye on.
Now turning to something quite chilly. Tourists visiting Niagara Falls in Canada got a treat after the world's most iconic natural wonders froze over. Plummeting temperatures created dazzling ice formations. Visitors gathered to witness the partially frozen waters, turning the falls into a breathtaking winter wonder. Here's more.
Amid a frozen natural wonder, visitors have gathered at Niagara Falls on Saturday to take in the partially iced over torrents. Some used the occasion to make the most out of the glamorous scenery with a proposal in the frosty surroundings.
Well, we're celebrating our 10-year anniversary together, and
Well, we've heard it's nice to come here in the wintertime, so we figured we'd come check it out.
What do you make of it?
It's beautiful.
Yeah.
It's very nice.
It's really neat.
The way everything's kind of frozen over, all the icicles, especially coming out of the top of the power station there. All the icicles, all the frozen trees on the other side, partially frozen water around the falls. It all looks really nice.
Travellers, both local and overseas, were captivated by the snow-laden trees, glistening ice formations and floating chunks of river ice. Many described the scene as stunning and unforgettable, despite the biting temperatures.
It's cold and we never thought about coming here in the winter. It seemed like a crazy idea, but it's beautiful.
It wasn't really a crazy idea. Nancy just said we have to get out and go somewhere, and I really didn't want to go anywhere. She said, let's go to the Tesla thing.
He's a hibernator.
So I went, yeah, sure, but this is amazing. It's absolutely amazing. I don't know why I haven't been
And we
before.
haven't actually seen the whole thing inside there.
It's
this
incredible.
power plant is quite amazing.
A long-term Canadian-Mexican couple said winter offered a uniquely striking experience, calling it a true Canadian treasure.
We're Mexicans. We live in Canada from 2000. We visit the falls oftenly in summer and in winter. And we like to come in winter because the experience is absolutely amazing. You find everything frozen. It's cold, it's chilly, but it's beautiful. It's definitely a gem, a Canada gem.
Cameras clicked incessantly as onlookers tried to capture the frozen power and glittering beauty of the waterfalls. For many, the visit was more than sightseeing. It was a chance to savour one of the country's renowned natural spectacles at its most magical display.
Wow, very impressive sights there. I don't know if I was invited out. I'd want to go, especially being that cold. But anyway, it sounds like a great time, especially for the couple that got the proposal. Thank you for watching Daybreak with me, Nadia Jani. I'll be back tomorrow to take you through the latest updates throughout the morning. Make sure you stay tuned to A News.